at the time. I can't even remember the name of the company. They were in the telco business, and they had this kind of sophisticated room where they repaired technology with using X-rays and lasers and stuff, like repairing. I mean, I'm not technical at all, Sean. I'm far from technical. So they were repairing stuff, let's call it.
I mean, you're non-technical like myself. I'm not technical. I'm a business guy, and that's sort of just what I am through and through. So I'm taking it you didn't start out as a lonely field tech engineer. Where did you start?
No, I didn't. I started life actually in the travel industry. I had no technical background whatsoever. I'd worked in the travel industry in Paris, in France, actually, when I left university. I went over to work there and spent 2 years with a company called GTA. They were an English company. They were what's called wholesale tour operator. And their job was to sell what's called land services, like hotels, kind of long distance coaches, short distance coach hire, restaurants, speaking language speaking guides, like so Japanese. They were in the Asian market predominantly, so it was Japanese, Mandarin, Cantonese from Hong Kong speaking guides, and other parts of Asia from South Korea. It was a job. I knew a guy who was working there. There happened to be 2 other Irish guys in there. The lady working there was an Irish woman. We were called the Irish Mafia and that was called that's what we were called by the guys out of the head office in London. They called us the Irish Mafia because actually we wielded a lot of power actually because we were pretty good. There was 4 or 5 of us that were pretty good in there. We were all young, had no idea of how to operate in a political office environment, but we didn't care. We worked really, really hard. So at the time, I guess this would have been mid-90s. So the economy that everybody looks at China today, but back then it was Japan, and was, the equivalent of China today. And Japanese people were massively respected in terms of their work ethic. So when we went in there, this was known. This is all through like school life and college life. You looked up at Japan. So I'm surrounded by these Japanese workers. So I was determined to outwork all of them. And we all were. So we outworked them, and of course then I drank them as well because we're young guys. So we'd stay there if necessary till 2 o'clock in the morning working till the last Japanese person would leave, and then we would go on the piss and still turn up before they turned up. Some days never sleeping, and then working again for literally we could work 17, 18 hours, not a bother on us. We'd sleep then obviously for the whole weekend, and get a sleep back, but we didn't. It was hilarious. Like we were totally determined. So I started life in nothing to do with technology at all. But what got my interest in technology is that industry was changing at the time in the 90s. And what happens in the travel industry when it changes, it's an immature market or an early adopter travel market. So the market is from one country into Europe. So Japanese market is travelers coming into Europe. And when they started traveling first in the 60s and 70s and early 80s, they always came in large groups because they didn't speak the language. They were totally unfamiliar. Like if you've ever been to Japan, today it's probably it's not as strange as it might have been going back in the 70s. Okay, because the world is much more globalized. But back then, Japanese people coming to Europe would have been very unusual. Okay. So they didn't want to go. They didn't speak the language, and they would have become in large groups. But when the market matures, what happens is the next generation travel, and they travel in smaller groups in the same way we would travel probably now. We're okay with it because travel is, well, COVID has changed that clearly. But when it comes back, travel, we're all comfortable with traveling to a point when we don't need to turn up in a busload of 50 people. Okay, and what that did to the market, to the providers, is it changed their whole business model. Because previously you'd have one bus picking up 50 people at the airport who come off one flight, Japanese airline flight from Tokyo or wherever, or a Cathay Pacific flight from Hong Kong into Paris Charles de Gaulle or London Heathrow. The bus would pick them up and bring them to the hotel, pick up the next day, blah, blah, blah. Okay, and everything's organized. That's business model. Business model changes these people start to travel. They go back to the same travel companies, but the travel companies in Japan say, my provider on the ground, in this case GTA, you now need to give me, I've got 3 people coming in on Nippon Airways from Osaka. I've got 4 coming in from Japanese Airlines from Tokyo. They're all arriving within an hour of each other. And what was happening, all the companies were sending the 50 to 60 seater buses to pick up 3-4 people with a guide and an assistant. And the costs were outrageous. So I actually came up with an idea. I'm quite innovative. I will give you one boast about myself. I'm pretty innovative. So I looked at this and said, actually, this is all wrong. You've got to change the way they do this. And our whole planning internally needed to be changed. So without going into massive more detail, it got me thinking about automation. And I said, surely computers can do this stuff. Now, that's all I knew. So I started talking to the guys involved in the IT. I said, surely, listen, I used to do things like I'd shrink a page down that had all the planning details. And instead of sending 20 faxes to 20 different providers, I sent one fax to each of the different providers. And I taught them how to read our information. I said, can we not automate this? Surely we can send this by something else, email. So that got me interested. And as a total coincidence, my mother, as mothers do, Irish mothers, and I'm sure English mothers, and everyone's mother is important to them. My mother wrote to me in my apartment in Paris. I was living in Paris and having a great time. And the Eurostar had just opened up, so I was able to get the train between London and Paris. I was really having a great time. She wrote to me, and she included at the back of the Irish Times, which is one of the Irish newspapers, an advert from IBM looking for graduate employees on their special graduate program. And that's how I got into IT.
So at what point then, and I'm sure things were all rosy and great at IBM because, Big Blue at the time were very well known for a lot of great things as a great company, great training program, management tracks, so on and so forth. What was the worst thing about working at IBM? I mean, bureaucracy? Did you encounter any nightmare scenarios at IBM that made you think, what am I doing here?
No, I enjoyed IBM actually, in the most part. And there's always challenges. I was given the job after that was a success. They gave me the job to actually sell all of their channel products. Then, it just happened as well at the same time. IBM, Lou Gerstner was CEO of IBM. Actually, I thought he did a reasonable job. He wanted IBM to get into the services business. He didn't want his sales rep selling these computers, mainframes maybe, but the mini computers, the AS400s at the time, or mid-range systems as they were called, and peripherals were becoming more and more important, which became storage area networks and everything else. But he wanted the channel to do that. So he came up with this thing called the Business Partner Charter, I think it was called. And so one day, obviously you have to sign somebody in every country to do it. So this gave it to the sales director, who gave it to my boss, who gave it to me. I have nobody to give it to, by the way. So that's the other lesson you learn on the way up the ladder. You're on the way up, you're down the bottom. You just got to do what's given to you. So it was given to me, and I had to figure it out. That was challenging in a different way to the other. The other one was more fun because nobody was selling it anyway. This one was trickier because actually it turned out that my colleagues hadn't been doing a great job at selling. So they were my colleagues, and they hadn't been doing a great job other than to a handful of big customers from the banks and insurance and the telco, and hadn't really sold this technology anywhere else. And when I did initial research, IBM was way behind in Ireland than it was, say, in the UK or other places. And I went over to the UK, spent a week on the back of a guy's motorbike out of Birmingham, going around to all these business partners. And I really learned the business. Great fun and scary. but yeah, so that was challenging. So I think the thing that was probably the most challenging, and it's challenging in all business, is politics. I was very lucky that I had a really good boss who let me, not that he was a great manager per se, but he suited me, that I just was able to operate in a very entrepreneurial way. Yeah. And he had his boss, a guy called Sean McElwain, was amazing. I was one of the main reasons I joined IBM was because of him. He was just totally got what I was able to do, and was leaving both him, both me and my boss, free rein to do it. Yeah. He moved to the UK. He got a job to the UK, and the guy took over his job. He he took a dislike to me. Yeah. I'm a Southside Dubliner, and so was my boss. And most of the other guys in the office were Northside Dubliners. And I mean, I get on with both sides, but for whatever reason, we just didn't click, you know. And I wasn't sure for ages, but I was trying to figure it out. So I can hold my drink. So we had this big party one night, and I remember, but he couldn't hold his drink. He probably doesn't even remember this. I won't use his name to embarrass the poor guy, because he was all right underneath it all. But we all were out drinking, so I deliberately stayed in his company for ages, late in the evening one night, watching when he was really drunk, and of course decided to get involved in the conversation and to see what happened. And he came out and he said a couple of things, you know, not necessarily directly, but I got clear impression that he had a problem with me. Yeah, he was like cold shoulder, which was fine. It was exactly what I wanted to find out. So the following Monday, I asked the secretary, could I meet him? So we arranged a meeting that week, and I said, gee, have I done something? Because I was told that maybe I'd done something that maybe I pissed him off. But he said, no, nothing. So then I knew immediately it had nothing to do with anything I'd done. He just didn't like me. So I decided, at literally walking out of his office, I was leaving the company.